Welcome back, everybody. I'm Music Nerd here. Now, if this is your first time viewing this channel, I do a series of videos called Beginner's Guides where I recommend albums from a particular genre for people that haven't really got into that genre. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Britpop. Now, Britpop was a movement in the late 80s through the late 90s in which a surge of British bands started to dominate alternative rock. And they became so popular in Britain that they started to find some commercial success in the States. So in this era, there were a ton of great bands, ton of great albums, and I'm here to recommend 5 great albums from this genre, from this era, for anybody who's looking to get into this genre or has heard of this genre but doesn't know where to start. But as always, if you enjoy the content on this channel, you enjoy these type of videos, please show your support. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button down below. If you're a return subscriber, hit the notification bell to be alerted for new content. Alright, let's get into it. First album I'm going to be talking about is the Stone Roses debut album, The Stone Roses, which came out in 1989. Now, this is one of, if not probably my favorite Britpop album. And this came out before Britpop was like coined in the media, but you can see the influence that it had on bands like Blur and Oasis and Suede. The Stone Roses, unfortunately, did not have the long-term success that those other bands had, but everybody knows that this album, what it did for the UK and music scene is astronomical. This came around a time where, British dance was making a revival. A lot of rave music, a lot of trashy disco music, house music was coming back into the mainstream. And over in the UK, they had this thing called Manchester, which stands, based off of the city Manchester. And as we know, Manchester has a great music scene. And around the late 80s, people were getting away from music like the Smiths and the Cure, and they were embracing dance music again. And one of those bands was Stone Roses. And let me tell you, like, for a person that doesn't really listen to British dance music or rave music at all or techno, this album has a great balance of like traditional kind of jangle British pop and futuristic dance music. I mean, look at a song like Fool's Gold. That song goes on for 8 minutes. There's even I think a longer version of this that goes on like 12 to 13 minutes, and the beat in this song is infectious. It seems like the band is throwing any trick in the book into this one song, and it became their biggest hit. But then there's other songs like I Want to Be Adored, which is just kind of a dark but very seductive opening to this album. She Bangs the Drums, I Am the Resurrection, Shoot Me Down, and Waterfall, which is, I think, about a woman who dies off of an LSD trip. This is an incredible album. Please check this out if you haven't before. Stone Roses made a second album, like maybe in the mid-90s, had record label troubles, but are still immensely popular. I mean, even though they made 2 albums, their legacy has continued to grow and grow, and you can see it in today's music. So check this album out. Alright, next album I'm going to talk about is Suede's self-titled album, Suede, which is also their debut album. This is pretty much a trend here in this video, but Suede was one of those bands that kind of recalled the glam era in the 70s, bands like, T-Rex, Roxy Music, and even David Bowie in the Ziggy Stardust era, but blending it with, the Smiths and modern British music, so it was kind of like a post-modernist blend. I think that's what a lot of these bands were trying to go for, is that we're going to respect the past, but we're going to add a modern flair to it. And Suede did the same thing. And I think with Suede, when this album became so popular, that's when the term Britpop kind of came into the mainstream. Like journalists started writing it in, Britpop this, Britpop that. Like there was something building here, and Suede kind of stamped it and put it on the map. Now, with this album in particular, yes, there's glam rock music, there's metal music, punk music. There's also romantic ballads here. Songs like Middle Mickey is kind of put this band in the mainstream, and they won a ton of awards. And Suede, like the Stone Roses, never became like one of the biggest Britpop bands. I mean, they were for a while, but they never really had that success, that crossover success here in America. But listening to this album, like I said, you can hear the influences not only of the past, but what Suede did for other bands. And I think this album is very underrated in the sense that the fact for a debut album to be this ambitious, to kind of say like, hey, like, we're wearing our influences on our sleeve, but we're bringing something new to the table. And I think for a generation of British people, they wanted something new. And so with Suede coming into the mainstream in Britain, you really sense that the Britpop movement was going to be a force that was hard to get rid of. So yeah, check out this album. Next album I'm going to be talking about Blur's Parklife. Now, Blur, one of my favorite British bands of this era, especially of the 90s. And I think Blur does not get credit, because Oasis was such a big deal worldwide. But Blur really tackled a lot of different genres. Britpop, people think it's just like, what it is, pop music and guitars and all that stuff and rock music. But Blur covered a ton of different genres like psychedelia, trashy disco music, even straight on grunge a little bit. I mean, Blur was kind of like all over the place and tried everything. There's their debut album, There's No Other Way. It's kind of like a nice, kind of like a bastardized version. And I mean this in a great way possible. It is a compliment, but bastardizing kind of what the Stone Roses were doing, but adding like a pop sheen to it. It became like a minor hit in America. And then Modern Life is Rubbish kind of showed them embracing like, the Kinks, like 60s British rock, Small Faces, The Who. And now with Parklife, it's kind of like the grandest version of Modern Life is Rubbish. Set with better songwriting, more confident singing. Damon Albarn, for all of you that know, he before he was in the Gorillaz, he was the lead singer of Blur. And man, this album is incredible. Of course, we all know the biggest hit that came from this album is, was it Girls Like Boys or something like that? And that song is kind of like a satire of, the British house scene. And really, even though it was a satire, it became their biggest hit here in the States, and it kind of accidentally revived the British kind of electronic scene in the mid-90s. But there's other songs here like Tracy Jack's End of the Century that really displayed Damon Albarn's growth as a songwriter. And yeah, Parklife is kind of like a slice of life of Britain in 1994, taking what the Kinks did in the 60s, observations, just kind of like, half serious, half comical observations of like 1990s Britain. And yeah, check out this album. It's a fascinating listen. For somebody who obviously didn't grow up in Britain, there's a couple of things that you probably don't get. But with all that being said, the music here is amazing. The different types of music, very diverse. So for a Britpop album, and of course it became a huge smash and it put Blur on the map. Last album is gonna be talking about, the biggest band from this genre, Oasis. First, we're gonna be talking about their first album, Definitely Maybe, an album that I like less than their second album. But with all that being said, I mean, what a great way to put yourself on the map. I mean, Oasis with the Gallagher brothers, love them or hate them, but they really were very talented and crafting these amazing pop hooks and really drawing you in. Now, definitely maybe it's a little bit more edgier than their second album, and you definitely get the sense that, yes, like the other bands, they're wearing their influences on their sleeve. The Beatles, Rolling Stones, Sex Pistols, The Clash, a little bit of that. But the songwriting here is amazing. Married with Children, Digby's Dinner, Supersonic, I Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. I mean, these guys were from Manchester, they're working class lads. These were the kind of guys that wanted to be famous. And, they had that kind of down to earth cynicism, like most Generation X people, but, they were able to do it with kind of, they were students of the game, Noah Gallagher obviously was the John Lennon of the group, and Liam Gallagher was kind of like, Paul McCartney if Paul McCartney did, McCartney did do drugs, but Liam Gallagher will fuck you up. So these were not the pretty boys per se, but they had a voice, and they connected with a ton of people in Britain, and started to gain some traction here in the States too, but that would not happen until their next album. But definitely definitely one of the, no pun intended, one of the best debut albums in the rock genre in the past 30 years. Just a very solid album. And with Oasis, yes, they talk a lot of shit, and they were very braggadocious. They thought that they were the best band in the world, and with an album like this, it's hard to fight against that. I mean, they were, one of the, if not the most popular British band. I mean, I think this album was the fastest selling British album of all time. So, at the time. So, yeah. Said enough about this album. Check it out. And the last album I'm going to be talking about is Oasis' second album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. This is the album that kind of made Britpop from an alternative genre to a worldwide genre. This brought Oasis from British superstars into British megastars. I mean, this album blew up, especially here in America, with that song Wonderwall, which is still a timeless classic. Yeah, sometimes it gets made fun of a bit, but as far as ballads go, it's one of the best of the 90s for sure, and it became a top 10 hit. And really, Oasis didn't look back. I mean, they're the most popular rock band in the world for sure. But besides Wonderwall, what makes this album a classic? Definitely maybe, like I said, was a little bit more edgier, a little bit more like, it was an album that represented a time and place in Britain, working class people being crapped on by the rich. And with this album, Oasis did become the 1%. They did become the rock superstars that they pined to be on their first album. Because this album blew up, and Champagne, Supernova, Roll With It, Don't Look Back in Anger. Obviously, the Beatles were huge influences on Oasis here. And yes, they did get mocked for dressing like the Beatles. Songs that were very, very close to sounding like the Beatles. A lot of people did not like the way that Oasis was sort of like kind of copying riffs and melodies. I mean, you can kind of hear it here where the song Morning Glory is very identical to REM's The One I Love. But with all that being said, I mean, you can, tell me what you think in the comment section about what you think about Oasis. It's not Greta Van Fleet here. You know what I mean? Like, Oasis, yes, they did borrow, and some may say steal, a couple of those band sounds. But they still had their own flavor to the mix. The Gallagher brothers, although they were dysfunctional, they did work great together. And What's the Story, Morning Glory showed that Britain might take over the rock scene, and Oasis and Blur kind of have a competitive battle. And although Blur was winning initially, Oasis with this album blew them out of the water. And that's no slight to Blur, because Blur, like I said, still a great band. And after this album, they still went on to do great things. Damon Albarn, of course, went on to be with the Grills, and so they had a longer legacy. Whereas Oasis at the time just kind of seemed bigger and better, but as time went on, they never really replicated the success of their first two albums. And to be honest with you, Oasis, their legacy has kind of waned over time. Let's not forget with this album how great Oasis were. So yeah, definitely check out this album. I'm sure if you're British, you probably have heard or had heard maybe some, at the least, heard some of these songs in passing, because that's how big this album was. Those are my beginner's guides to Britpop, 5 great albums from this genre. If you haven't checked out these albums, please do so. YouTube recommends these other videos to check out after this video. And let me know what you think in the comment section. What are your least favorite Britpop albums? And maybe you can share some to me that I never heard of. So, yeah. Love you guys. Until next time. Peace.